Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. First of all, I swear I'm wearing a shirt. It's just down. But welcome back to my channel. Today we've got a very special video. This was I think this is my second ever guest appearance on someone's podcast. My friend Zan, she messaged me about a week or two ago asking if I would come onto her podcast, the Siren Experience, and speak about, really she wanted to learn more about the period blood face mask that I did a couple of weeks ago. And that really piqued her interest, and she just wanted to have a discussion about it and a discussion about menstrual shame and just femininity in general. And as one of my passions has really evolved into like exploring the divine feminine rising, I was like, this is the opportunity for me. So although I was really nervous, and maybe you can pick up on that in the way that I speak, it was kind of hard for me to watch this podcast back because I wasn't speaking so eloquently and I was using a lot of likes and things like that. But nonetheless, it was one of my first appearances in a conversation type of format. And overall, I think I did really, really well. And the conversation that we had was amazing and beautiful. And we talked about so much. Of course, we talked about menstrual shame. We talked about blood magic. We talked about synchronicities, psychic experiences, spirituality. There was so much cool stuff in this video. So I am excited for you to receive it because we produced it with so much love, and I am so excited to do even more of these. So if you want to check out Zan and her work, I will leave descriptions in the link below. She was so kind to let me upload a version of this podcast on my channel as well. It was so nice of her to do that because she didn't have to. So yes, but please show her some love. And yeah, I love her and I love you, and thank you for being here and thank you for watching.
So first of all, thanks so much for joining me here.
I'm so excited. I haven't seen you in so long and I'm like, yay, Zan!
Yeah, we went from seeing each other almost every day to not at all.
I know.
I'm really excited, and I had to ask you to do this with me. Just because, as I mentioned to you, seeing the video that you did, that you put on your vlog about doing the menstrual face mask.
Yeah.
That was really intriguing for me because of several reasons. And just to give you a little bit of background on how it affected me. I switched over after having my son to using, a menstrual cup and getting a lot more comfortable with the idea of seeing on a regular basis and in its raw form, not seeing menstrual blood, being able to smell it and all of that. And I recently, on my podcast, did an episode about free bleeding. When I heard about it, I decided to try, and that really opened my mind up a little bit to feeling differently and seeing menstruation differently, seeing my flow differently and all of that. And I just felt like that episode that you did was really expansive for me because while I had heard about, people using menstrual blood as a face mask, seeing you do it on camera really normalized it for me, and it was truly expansive seeing the process. I personally have not actually tried it, but seeing you try it as somebody that I know, and seeing you do it live was definitely something that shifted my perspective in a major way. And what you mentioned towards the end about using it as fertilizer is something that I've been doing for a couple of years now with my plants. And it's been one of the many things that has shifted the way that I feel about menstruation and the way that I feel about menstrual blood as not waste matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so funny because the idea for the video, it came like I think the day before I made the video, because like I'd been following a lot of like feminine embodiment coaches and people who like talk about this stuff. And then a week before I tried it, I saw this girl. Do you know Plantiful Soul on Instagram?
No, I'm
She's
not
just
sure.
like a YouTuber, Instagram person. She like posted a picture of her wearing it on her story. And I was like shocked. I was like, oh my God, can you imagine having the courage to do that? Like, and I was honestly, because heard about it, but I'd never done it. So there was still like, I was observing my reaction to it. Cause I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I would ever share it to my story. And then as I was exploring those feelings, I was like, wait, this might be one of those things where it's an opportunity to like level up. Because I noticed the discord within me about it when I saw her do it. Claire, her name's Claire. When I saw Claire do it, I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine doing it on a story. And then I was like sitting down and thinking about it. I'm like, wait, why wouldn't I? And I just was anyway, and then I didn't want to pressure myself too much. I was like, okay, I'm not even gonna put it on my story or anything. Let me just try it for myself. Let me just on my next period, let me just see what it is like, and just see if I can even do it on myself. And so in the morning of the period that started, I was like, oh, I'm gonna try it today. And the inner voice within me was like, record it. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna record it. I was like, I'm scared to do it myself because I was worried it was gonna, like, I was scared of my own authentic reaction to it. Like, even in the video, like, I was so nervous to actually touch it because similar to you, like, I had just, I wore pads and stuff and tampons in university, and I, like, never saw it because I was using tampons for so long, so you, like, barely ever see the blood. And then I started using menstrual cups about like 2 or 3 years ago. And that, it really did, similar to you, like familiarize me with it. And then this felt like the next step. And it was just one of those inner things that it felt like the calling to do it was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. And I knew that if I didn't do it, that it was just gonna bother me because I'm like, who cares? Like, one of the things I've really been exploring in the past year is just like, showing up even more authentically with what I believe, because a lot of people in my like immediate surroundings, like I have a lot of support virtually, but a lot of people in my immediate surroundings are very like, I don't know how to explain it. They're very just like whatever the norm is, that's what they're gonna believe. They don't really question much. And so to do that, like this whole, like the past couple months, there's been such a process of me like coming out more and more and more into this like more crazy version of a read to them, but to me it's like more authentic. And it was just another level of that. It was like, okay, if I can do this, then I could do anything. And what it really did was, it was really scary to post it. And even after I filmed the video, I was like, I filmed an Instagram photo too. Like, I took a photo and I put it to my feed. And it was funny because just a couple days before, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't even imagine posting it to my story. And then I just, like, that day, I just posted it, and then I just sat there and, like, watched the feelings that came up, and, like, the shame, and the, like, fear of, like, judgment. And honestly, I would say, like, 70 to 80% of the reactions were very positive and very aligned with, like, what I personally believe about it. And it's, like, people really recognized the messaging. And I received a lot of messages, like, from people who, like, know me throughout my life, and they said, like, they definitely got triggered. Like, there was, like, a part of them that, like, cringed when they saw it. But they really appreciated the message behind it. And so they, like, went the extra effort to, like, message me after. So, and then there's, like, those, like, handful of people who are, like, this is so gross. But it wasn't as hard to deal with those comments as I thought. Because when I see them, I, like, am able to recognize that they're just in a different frame of mind, and I was there very short, like, not so long ago. But it's funny to see some people are, like, aggressive about it. Some people are, like, mad.
Oh,
that I did
yeah.
that.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was definitely triggered. I first saw it on Instagram. I saw the photo, and I think the caption said something about like,
Yeah.
"Oh, triggers you," and I'm like, yes, it does.
Yeah.
It triggers me, but it also intrigued me to the point where I went to YouTube immediately and went to look, for the video. Um, and I watched it in parts because I kept getting interrupted. So I watched it in parts and then I watched it together. And I could sense that you were, it was something new for you. And I felt like the triggering in me was also like a fear in me to sort of, expand into that realm as
Mm-hmm.
well. And it triggers us all before we get to the point where we're like, maybe let me ease myself into this. And it intrigues a lot of people, no matter how triggered, whether they're triggered negatively
Mm-hmm.
or positively, it's definitely expansive, I think, for everybody. I remember the way that I felt before posting about my first experience free bleeding.
Mm.
Most people had never even heard of free bleeding before, and they were like, "What is that? What is it?" So you're not gonna use any tampons, no pads. Like, where does the blood go? And I didn't know the answers to those questions before I tried it. I just tried it, and when I woke up, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do a podcast about this and just talk about it. And that episode had like 4 times the listeners as my average my average podcast. So I feel like there are a lot of people out there who are just really interested in maybe trying these things, or even just hearing about it from a different perspective than what we were taught growing up. I remember feeling very embarrassed in my teens, in school. I went to an all-girls school, an all-girls Catholic school, and in a lot of ways we formed this cocoon for each other where it was safe to be a girl, but
Mm-hmm.
still not entirely, because we all had our own paradigms and the way that caused us to react to certain things, especially menstruation. And
Yeah.
I remember feeling really embarrassed if I had a leak at school. Whereas, all my classmates have probably experienced having a leak. And I'm about to turn 31. I have a 3.5-year-old son. So safe to say I have experienced a lot of, different things that a woman would experience in life, or somebody who, is living from a feminine perspective. I've experienced a whole lot, but I still was not entirely comfortable with a leak until I tried free bleeding and realized that it's not that big a deal. Blood can get on stuff. There's ways to get it off. Like, it's my blood. um, but sometimes it really just takes the experience to really fully shift that perspective. Um, and sometimes it takes being exposed to somebody like you who has tried it and has filmed it and is showing that, showing your perspective. It takes a few times being exposed to that sort of thing before we're actually ready to try, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. Even like the concept of free bleeding seems more scary to me. Because exactly what you said, it's like, oh my god, what would I? Because we want to be so in control of it. Because you've been told like this is something that you have to like keep under lock. Like you can't. I even remember like in high school, like having to hide. You didn't have to do it, but it was just common to like if you were going to the bathroom on your period from class, hiding it somewhere so no one saw it in the hallway. Like what? Yet more
Yeah.
than like half of the school is going through the same experience and we're acting like no one is. Like what? Um, it's so crazy.
Yeah,
And
it's really interesting.
I think I I like the word expansive because I think so many people are looking for just, especially women, we're just looking for like we're all in this like bubble of learning how to like truly love ourselves, and more people are kind of like joining in on this bubble and realizing that all these like
beliefs that were conditioned into us from patriarchal societies are just like not in alignment with who we naturally are, and like women are like starting to realize their innate power. And a part of that, like I feel like one of the first things that we really do kind of explore is menstrual blood and menstruation and that whole cycle, because it's so natural. It happens to us once. Okay, so the people who bleed, it happens like very regularly, but it is at least something that everyone, if you're not even a woman or if you don't bleed yourself, you know of people who have it regularly, or your sister or your mom. Like, it's so normal yet not normalized.
Yeah, it's such a major part of our lives. In some ways, I would say that certain aspects of our lives revolve around our menstrual cycle. And I mean, I didn't get here, by accident or just by some sort of fluke. I know where I've come from with regards to like my viewpoints with menstruation, and I too was hiding pads and tampons, and it's something that we talked about throughout life. I remember being like 7 or 8 years old, and that's all we were talking about at lunch, because that's what we learned in class today, that oh my goodness, we're gonna get to this point in our lives where we're just gonna be bleeding every month. And we're like, okay, when is this supposed to happen and what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
and then I personally went through this period where it was like everybody was menstruating around me, and I was a late bloomer, so I didn't have boobs or a period or anything, whereas everybody in my class, I mean, apart from me being one of the younger pairs in my group, I was also a late bloomer. I think I probably had my first period at 14, maybe 15, 14, I'm not sure anymore. But it was a thing for me for a while, like, okay, is this gonna happen? Like, everybody has theirs, where's mine? And then it happens, and you're like, okay, now I have to deal with, it coming every month. I have to be mentally prepared, and I have to have my pads with me just in case it happens at school and all of that. And then it becomes a matter of you wanting to track your period, maybe for, to avoid pregnancy or to plan a pregnancy or whatever it might be. But I went through a lot of different phases. I went through phases, I would say, where I would actually feel ovulation happening in a lot of ways. I mean, right now I feel certain things like tender breasts and things like that, but there was a time where I was really, really in tune with my whole reproductive system. And you had another video on your YouTube where you were talking about the positive effects of like negative emotions that we experience. And you mentioned something, which is why I kept using the word expansive, because it made so much sense to me. You mentioned that when you were on birth control, you were a little bit more numb to your feelings, your emotions. I've briefly been on birth control, and that was a long time ago, so I don't fully remember what the experience was like for me. But I do know that it just didn't really feel right to me, and I stopped, almost shortly after starting it up. But I found it really interesting because I'm somebody who feels very, very deeply all of my emotions. I sometimes say to people that, I don't think I have a middle ground, because I'm either extremely happy or extremely, like, all my emotions are so intense. For me, sometimes I feel like, oh my goodness, but there's some part of me that always felt that my ability and my willingness to feel those deeply negative emotions somehow facilitates my ability to feel those, extremely positive ones. And it just felt like, the deeper I can go, the more expansive I am feeling in general. So that really resonated with me, and it tied to a lot of things that I've, heard you talking about. And a lot of things that I've felt just you know, in my life experience in general.
Yeah. My story with birth control is like I started taking it in first year of university because I was with my boyfriend Garrett, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm having sex for the first time. Like, what do I do?" Like, because in university as well, like everyone's like so scared of getting pregnant. All of the girls, because I guess it's one of the first times in their life when they're also, we lived in a university town, so most of the people who were there were like they were living by themselves in this town. So everyone's advice was like, oh, just go on birth control. It's so easy. Like, just take the pill. Like, all you have to do is like go to the school clinic and they'll like prescribe it to you. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went and I got it, and then immediately, like a week, like they told me that there was going to be side effects. So I was kind of prepared, like I was kind of watching for it. But then a week or so after I started taking it, like I just started feeling really weird, and that intuitive nudge from within to be like, this ain't right was really strong. But at that time, I would say that was in 2015. At the time, I didn't trust, like I didn't know what intuition really was. Like I didn't know that there was something that we could kind of like connect to in our inner guidance system. And so I ignored it, and I like the only people that I could like, I just went to external people to ask about it. I'm like, oh, like I feel really weird. I feel like I know that I'm in a new situation. Like I've just moved out of my family home and there's a lot of new things going on, but I feel really like not myself. And everyone was like, oh yeah, that's just normal. Like don't worry about it. And so I didn't worry about it for like all of university. And then last year around April, actually around, oh my God, this is like perfect timing, because this is like almost exactly a year ago I like stopped using birth control. Like I was on the pill for like a couple of years. And I did it because I was in this group call, and I was introduced to the concept of like the inner seasons. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not.
Okay, so the inner seasons, different people have different ways to like really characterize it, but it's like people have associated different archetypes with the different phases that we go through in our menstrual cycle. So you could like find information from people who really have studied this deeper, but on the surface level, it's like we have, just like the outer seasons, we have inner seasons, so winter, spring, summer, and fall. And the inner winter is our period when we're actually bleeding. And that's our most like inward period. And a lot of cultures and spiritual traditions throughout the eras, in like a lot of the women, like, you know, with the red tents, like women actually like left the community to go like in an more inward cycle, because you're so inward, you're more open to insights and more open to intuitive information and downloads. And it's harder to hear those downloads when you're surrounded by noise. So like a lot of women like chose to like separate themselves for a little bit, and then eventually that turned into that practice got in the hands of the people who were controlling, and they were like, oh, this means we have to like exile women when they're on their periods, and it like got all distorted when it was like originally like the women wanted to do it because they understood the significance of that time. And then the springtime is when you're done bleeding, and it's like you're still slowly starting to like gain your like inner energy back. And then the summer is like the most outward period. Like I think it's your estrogen levels are the highest of your cycle, and you're just very outward, and you're very like open to giving and giving energy. And then fall is like your fall, like autumn period, is where most people get their PMS symptoms. And it can be harsh because you've just come from summer, like you've come from this really like happy, uplifted, outward facing place, which is where society wants us to be all the time. But then you go into fall and your hormones start dropping and your energy level starts dropping, and that could be like cause a lot of like grief because you want to be in the summer all the time, when in reality it's like, you know, you go through cycles and now you're in a downward. So we learned about that, and one of the things she said is that the person who was teaching me, her name is Gabby Francis. I am Gabby Francis on Instagram. She was saying like it's harder to feel it sometimes, like feel the inner seasons when you're on a hormonal birth control. And I like that instantly like clicked in me. I was like, oh my god, this is what my inner guidance has been telling me, that something's off, that like some balance is off. And immediately I was like, I'm off. And then I asked them, and they're like, oh, just make sure that you're not doing, like, make sure that this is actually what you want to do, like make sure it's coming. I'm like, no, this has been a message that has been for me for years, like. And then I immediately stopped. And I actually made your video cut off. I want to see your face. I immediately stopped the birth control, and I started documenting that too. There's like a short little playlist on my YouTube video called like Natural Birth Control Journey, because when I was going to stop birth control, people like advised me against it, because they're like, oh my god, like you don't know what's gonna happen, like because your body's so used to the pill, like you might have like really crazy side effects. And then I tried it, and it was like nothing, and I just every single day I just felt better and better and better. And I never looked back since. And it really, like, I was really able to observe the fact that it truly does numb you out. It's like I'm the same as you. I have like really high highs and really low lows, but then it's like going from, and then that just really like flattened it. And I would feel, but I would also like, there was during that time in my life, I was also going through all this conflict with my family in university, and now I'm more so out of that. But it was hard to I feel like if I wasn't on the pill, I wouldn't have felt so depressed. I feel like I would have been better able to handle everything if I hadn't been so numbed out, because for me, emotions are like signals. It's like what Nikki always says, it's like the divine alarm clock. You know, in like A Course in Miracles, like that is what always shows me like something's wrong, and to not have that is such a loss, to not have those emotions to like help guide us in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it's so true. And I definitely resonate with that feeling of wanting to go inward, you know, when you're menstruating. I remember that first time that I tried free bleeding. I'm one of those people who likes to make everything especially bent.
Yeah.
I had like my special designated dress, and I had like a whole fun night by myself at home. I think I had done a Zoom call earlier in the evening with some friends, but then I really set time aside for me that night. My son was with his dad, and I made it a very special time for myself. And it's I guess that was like my little red tent.
Mm-hmm.
But when you spoke about how, you know, the patriarchy kind of changed it into a let's exile women when they're on their periods, it really triggered something in me, because I have been trying, well, both with myself and with my son, doing something called positive timeout. And it's something that I talk about with his godmother. We do something like this on my podcast once a month. And talk about different, you know, positive discipline strategies. And when I heard the idea of a positive timeout, I was interested, because I was doing timeout with my son, but I was definitely doing it as a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And what resonated with me with the positive timeout is that instead of using timeout as a punishment, acknowledge that, you know, when we feel better, we act better. And that's not just children, that's all of us. So sometimes if we actually, you know, strategically take that time out and do things that make us feel better, we act a lot better at the end of that time out, rather than, you know, being cast away because we're badly behaved, or being cast away because we're bleeding. I think if we see it as our special time, not where we're staying away from people because we're moody or because we're bleeding and that's a turn off or whatever. It's our time, you know, to focus on our own inner wisdom and the relationship with self. And that was what I started using that time as. And that really felt amazing for me to do that for myself. And to, you know, just acknowledge that, I guess, the divine aspect of that period for me, where I can connect with myself. It feels it just feels like the right thing to do for me at that time. It's not like it's just, and this is what I'm feeling right now. And interestingly enough, around that same time, I listened to the book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves. And there was a certain part of the book that was talking about, knowing your cycles and knowing, the times when knowing what you need at each point in time, knowing when you need to be more social, knowing when you need to be less social, when you need alone time, and just owning that for myself and not feeling guilty about it, or not feeling like I really owe people my energy all the time, because it's all about us knowing what point we're at in our own cycles and honoring that.
Yeah. There's like this interesting, I love that book. It's like, I looked over here because it's like sitting right here.
Oh, wow.
Synchronistic. I like, one of the things that, because I had this like really life-changing truly experience with being on birth control and being off it and noticing how I changed, and then also getting people's reaction to it, like people being like, I don't know, like people are weird about birth control too, like women, some people are like really scared of coming off it because they've been like, this is the way, it's like, oh my god, what are you gonna do now, you're gonna get pregnant, and it's like, actually I'm not. And I started doing like the fertility awareness method for a while, just using this app, but now I feel like I do have like more of an internal sense, like I know when I'm ovulating, like you said. And that part of the conversation really struck me, because when I first got my period, I was very similar to you. Like I don't know how old I was, but I was definitely later than everyone else, and I was so worried about it. I don't, this is like maybe before, like when I was young, there was, remember Yahoo Answers? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Around that time, I think I was like 13 or 14, and I went there and I like wrote this anonymous post. I was like, am I ever gonna get my period? Like, I was just so nervous about it. because it's almost like the coming of age, like it's like, oh, this is like, oh, now I'm like a woman, like now I'm no longer a child. And so it was like very significant to me. And then a week later, like I actually did get my period. And the crazy thing is that I wore a pad, even though I'd never gotten a period before. That day I woke up and I just wore a pad that day. And then later in the afternoon, I got the period. And I remember being like blown. I was like, oh my god, how did I know that? And now I realize it was just this intuitive sense. But back then, I had no idea that, like I said, we had no idea that we had an inner intuition that could guide us. And I was just like, whoa, I think I'm psych. Like, I'm a magical person. Like, I knew that I was going to get my period, and then I got it. And it was like the best, like, first period experience ever. And then I've been really like, another thing is like, I've been really happy with my period to always have it. Like, I've had a really positive perception of it myself, because I grew up Muslim, and you have to pray 5 times a day when you're Muslim, but you don't have to pray if you're on your period. And so whenever I had my period, I would like celebrate, because I'd be like, oh my god, now no one can tell me to pray, no one can tell me to do anything. Because like the act of praying was like, it wasn't taught to me as like a spiritual connection. It was more like, if you don't pray, your dad's gonna yell at you. Like, you gotta pray. And so when I had my period, I could just be like chilling, and they'd be like, or did you pray? And I'd be like, I don't have to pray today. And everyone would leave me alone. And it was the best thing ever. But that comes back to the concept of like spiritual traditions and bleeding, because I've been watching this girl, or she's a mystic, and she also has a YouTube channel. Her name is Gigi Young, and she does a lot of like psychic work and research into like past spiritual traditions and ancient cultures and things like that. And one thing she told, like, one thing she presented in her video, I don't have my own research about this, but she was saying that in other eras of humanity, women who are very spiritually in tune, so like the high priestesses of certain areas, their menstrual blood would be like, it would be like a very important substance for the community. And it was they thought, they were in the belief that the blood is like what really connects you to your spiritual side, and that I don't know the exact wording she used, but it was just, there's a deep connection to our blood and our connection to our divinity. And so high priestesses who were really like, who dedicated their lives to being in tune with spirit, their blood was very revered, and people who wanted to be more connected, they would actually drink the blood of the high priestesses. And it was almost like blood magic kind of thing. And also, there's also, in that video, she also talked about how in certain African religion, I don't know if it's cultures, but there was one, hoodoo, I think, is the religion, in that there's like this tradition where women would put their blood in a dish and then feed it to like a person that they wanted them to, like, feed it to a man, because they were like, if he eats it, then he's going to be like energetically connected to you.
So, well, you know, I'm from St. Lucia, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm so excited to ask you about this.
Yeah, the Caribbean has while it's very taboo, the Caribbean does have a very heavy presence of voodoo, obia, and those sort of things. And the idea of tying a man is so normalized in St. Lucia. There's actually a song that says, it starts, the first line of the song says 𝙨𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙞𝙗𝙗, which is Creole for tie a man, right? It is said that that's how it's done. It's interesting because I attended a workshop sometime last year where there was a lady named Valerie Merced. She has a publication called Precipice Magazine, and she also has a book called Seasons of Blood, where she talks about blood magic and menstrual blood and all that good stuff. And she did a presentation, and I was really into it because it clarified a few things for me. So in the legend has it that, you know, you have a man consume your menstrual blood, and he's basically like devoted to you after that.
Yeah.
You know, anything you want, because the song says 𝙨𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙗 bagay, tie a man and take everything.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and the legend also says that to get that river. So we have a volcano erupting in St. Vincent, but the one we have in St. Lucia is dormant, and it's actually a drive-in volcano with hot springs inside. So it's like sulfuric springs, and the legend says that, you know, the guy would have to bathe in there, like submerge himself in the water with the sulfur to get rid of that blood magic.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, so I haven't done extensive research on this, but Valerie was saying that, you know, most times, well, I think it's somewhere in South America or one of the Latin American Caribbean islands that she's from. They use sulfuric clay to make their menstrual face masks. And they also use it in magic, in that I think that the sulfur is known to somehow draw out the certain effects from the menstrual blood. And I said, wow, that's so interesting that, you know, in our culture, it's the sulfuric water that draws out whatever effects that blood has on the guy. And it's interesting that, you know, that's a common thread throughout so many different cultures.
Yeah. Also, I think this might, I don't know why it's telling me that there's less than a minute, so I might cut off, but I'll call you back.
Okay.
But that's one thing that I'm noticing, because I used to be very like, even though I'm so spiritual and like so like out with it now, for a long time I was very like in the closet with it, and I was very skeptical towards any ritual or any like concept of like magic or any sense that human beings had the ability to like control certain outcomes in our lives or things like that, like manifestation. I was like, that's bullshit. And then what really like got me to explore it deeper and explore it more seriously was just this thread of different cultures all around the world speaking about the same things. And it's like noticing those like coincidences, like of the sulfuric water, and it's like the legend. It's like, how could it be a coincidence? Like, there must be some sort of...
But yeah, you were mid-thought when we cut off, so I don't know where you were.
I do. I was holding the thought. I was saying...
Excuse my rooster in the background, by the way.
He just wants to be heard.
Yeah, it's funny because it's the kids who live upstairs, that's their pet, and they named him Siren.
Oh my god! Of course. He's like, this is my podcast. It has my name on it.
He's on everyone.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, I was saying about, I used to be very skeptical of any like beliefs or any knowledge or anything that people were talking about that didn't fit the like Western frame of thought. And then one of the things that really like got me to explore deeply and more seriously was just noticing that there was like a thread throughout all of these stories and myths. And there's another book that I'm reading called The Power of Myth, that just explores like mythologies and different cultures. And so many of the mythologies from different parts of the world, like indigenous cultures in North America, and then like there's a similar one in India, it all explores like the similar archetypes. And that was like, okay, there has to be something deeper if all these people who are geographically separated are coming upon these same concepts. Like, there has to be some sort of deeper thread within the human, just like humanity in general, that is informing all of this. And like, it's so interesting. Once I really like saw it from that, now it's like so easy for me to... That's one of the things that I find myself getting into a lot recently is spiritual history. Because, I don't know, like, you've probably heard, like, a lot of people in the New Age scene talk about Lemuria and Atlantis as different civilizations. Because we've heard about it in pop culture as, like, oh yeah, like, Atlantis, a sunken land, sure. But, like, the people in the New Age community are, like, talking about it like as a genuine like civilization that existed, like a part of humanity that was forgotten. And at first I was like, no way. But then now it's like going into past lives, and even in meditations that I've had, like having like past life meditation experiences, and then hearing random information come through. Like, I'll find a video and someone will talk about the exact scene that maybe I saw in a visualization randomly. They'll say it in the video, and I'll be like, okay, does this hold truth? And then I think about how different, like, for example, the Library of Alexandria, it was like this huge, like, all this wisdom that humanity had accumulated was burned in the great burning of like the Library of Alexandria. And it's like how much spiritual wisdom was part of that. And then going back to like thinking of where we are now, like most people are disconnected from spirituality. It's like weird to be spiritual, but in my belief system, it's like so integral to who I am. And it's like it's like so integral to the process of self-mastery, because to me, like, we're not just human beings. And so to be like masters of ourselves, like we have to acknowledge all aspects of selves. And it's like, and when you think about the religions and the patriarchal religions, and how one of the, like, even in the, there's so many tangents going on in my mind, so I'm going to try, but even just the, like, the witch trials and the burning of the witches, like all of this, like, goddess worship, was like suppressed by these new big religions that came through that were like all mostly about, they were like capitalizing on people's spirituality and then using that, morphing it into their whatever to control populations. And it's like, what, maybe this is all linked.
Oh, yeah. I so much of that resonates. And to be honest, I think it comes right back to, you know, your point about expansion. For me personally, I grew up Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very Catholic. You know, my entire family was Catholic. I went through the whole process of doing my first communion and my confirmation. I was in the church choir. I was in the youth group. I was very, very involved in church life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to college in my first year, I had a world history teacher who would use different religious myths to teach us, and some of that was from the Bible. So, you know, a lot of people were resistant to, you know, when we got to the Bible, because it's easy for us to look at other religions as myth when, you know, it's not the one who grew up believing like, okay, yes, this is it. And then I will never forget this one time in class, we were doing the Epic of Gilgamesh, and he was like, and this guy, he's half man and half God. And someone in the class was like, how is that even possible? And my professor's like, hello, Jesus. But it's interesting when you start looking at them from a different perspective, whether it's through academia or whether it's from you just being outside of that perspective for a while. And I mean, I respect all religions. And I feel like that was a catalyst to me getting to that point, me deconstructing my own so that I can become open to all there is out there. And I remember at that time thinking that all the religions are so similar. And there are just these little nuances that are completely cultural. It's like if you take one and you just shift it and allow the cultural influence of another place, it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. At the core of it, like all of them are preaching like unity, essentially. Like that's like what it is at the core of it. And then like you said, like the cultural, like for example, I grew up Muslim, like I said, so there's a lot of like war imagery going on in the Quran. And that's like what followers of like, this is another thing that I'm thinking about, because I've been really connecting with the goddess Isis, like the Egyptian goddess archetype. Yeah. Of course you are too. So I hate, like, when I talk, like, the Islamic Republic, it's like they call themselves ISIS. And it's like, I hate that. I hate that that word is most commonly used. Like, when we talk about ISIS, like, when we say the word, it invokes imagery of violence and imagery of, like, all of that. But anyway, that's a side point. That's not. So I'm saying, like, that groups like terrorist organizations, they utilize specific instances of the Quran, like specific verses that are kind of speaking about historical wars, like maybe the Crusades or something like that. And that is like completely a cultural influence, because they're kind of writing about what was going on in the time, at the time that religion was really like being birthed. But now people are like using it out of context. But in reality, like, yes, it is there, and people can, it's in the Quran, so people can technically use it. But that, I don't think that was really meant to be like a spiritual teaching. I think it was just like commenting on what was happening at the time to help people of the era understand it. So it's like, but when you like really get rid of, I love what you said, when you really like slice through all the conditioning, or sorry, the cultural conditioning, the cultural events and perspectives, at the core of it, everyone's messaging is the same.
It's very true. very true. And I remember seeing a quote one time, because we in the Bible it says that God created man in his own image and likeness. And I saw a quote one time that said actually man created God in his own image and likeness. It was really interesting for me to see the way, like, in that world history class was one of my favorite classes because it really got me thinking about a lot of things. Looking at the difference between like monotheistic religions and the polytheistic religions and the way that they relate to gods, goddesses, and their deities in general. Something that I noticed is like in the monotheistic religions, God is like this one all-powerful man in the sky who has power over everything, and we don't get to question anything. And I noticed that the relationship with the deities in polytheistic religions was a lot more comfortable, like a lot less. This one guy is gonna destroy everything,
Yeah.
I feel like the gods were a little bit more human, like in those religions. I found that so interesting. It always had me thinking, like, what creates that distinction? What causes that? And I still don't know if I have it figured out. But it was just really interesting to note that. And for me, I think for me right now, I'm just very open to whatever resonates, even if it might be a bit from this and a bit from that. And I just, combine that to whatever suits me. I go with the flow. And if something resonates, I just jump in. But it's so interesting, even tying into law of attraction. I remember when I first developed that intuitive urge to look up goddess Isis and learn more about her and everything. I remember the next day going to drop my son off at school, and I was never aware of a vehicle named Isis before. But that day I saw 7 different vehicles called Isis, and I was like, wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Just opened my awareness up to a whole car that I had never heard of before. But I truly believe that these things call out to you as much as you feel that interest. The interest is also pulling you in, because there are so many things that I became interested in, in that time frame that ties into the deities that I somehow found interest in, and I also remember a saying from, I think it was somebody who follows Ifa or Santeria, saying that you don't pick your orishas pick you. And seeing as I became interested in a lot of different things that tie into that, that really resonated for me. I think it's about a year now since I met you. That's been around this time last year, and a lot of different things that I became interested in at the time. That was the first time I was aware of Lizzie Jeff. I became aware of Lizzie Jeff literally on 420 last year. I heard of her
That's
before.
so funny.
Saw her on a 420 Zoom party that I attended, and I was like, oh, wow, who is this woman? And I just immediately went into all her music and was like, and a lot of people that I met you through Cacao. There are other friends that I have who were regularly attending, and other people that I met on there, and somehow I'm like, Lizzie Jeff? Yes. Oh my goodness. I love that. I love it. And it just kind of shows you how, just like we talked about with the religions, where there's just those similarities. I feel like, people who kind of vibrate on the same level with certain things, you just have a certain awareness, or you're likely to become aware of, certain other things that are just on that wavelength.
Yeah. it's like with the goddess Isis, and then even Lizzie Jeff, like the concept of divine feminine is like really, I think that's what we both like really connect with, which is why we kind of find ourselves in this, and even this conversation, of course, like we're talking about menstrual blood, because it's like there is a sense of like a rising going on, where this feminine like goddess culture and this power that women, like we've forgotten how much power we hold, because external entities have told us that we hold none. And even in like the mainstream, like even just I feel like growing up in Canada, and like I obviously like am very feminist, but I never really like aligned with that movement. And I think a part of it was that they kind of talk about everything like, oh my god, women are such victims. You know, and it's like, if you come from that place, like, sure, you can get, but if you truly believe at a core level that you are victim, it's really hard to empower. It's like you can't be empowered and a victim at the same time. And so I think like I always found like discord between that. I was like I understand that there's a lot that has been done to suppress women, but I don't, like, I also, like, there was always a part of me that recognized that there was something really special about being a woman, and that only now I'm, like, really starting to understand it with the Isis mysteries and with all these, like, divine feminine, like, just seeing Lizzie Jeff in her embodiment. And it's like, holy shit, like, that's a bad bitch. Like, that is, like, what every woman needs to, like, access within herself. Like, Lizzie's really inspired me. Like, she really inspired me just by how she acts, how confident she is, and how open she is about her femininity. Like, it was just, like, activating, just her presence. I think after that, I really was like, oh my god, there's something to this. There's something to, like, feminist, like, female magnetism. Like, Lizzie Jeff draws people to her, and she doesn't necessarily, like, she doesn't have like degrees in marketing or anything, but just the way that she is, I just had to listen to one song and I was like, who is this lady? You know,
you on Zoom, she's wearing sunglasses and she's probably completely fracked because it's 420, but I was like, who is this? And, you know, there's definitely something to be said about feminine magnetism. And I feel like even, you know, the whole concept of the siren, I'm going to get used to
yeah. Oh my gosh, yes.
That's a thing for me. So when I just went to college, I mean, throughout my teens, I had boyfriends, but I wasn't really allowed to have a boyfriend. Yeah. I was, you know, sneaking around talking to boys. When I moved to the US, I lived in Maryland for a while. I lived with my older sister who, I mean, she lets me do whatever. She's not like one of those older sisters who's all up in your business. But that was like my first experience really like actually seriously dating. And I felt completely lost, honestly, because I've never really had much conversation with women who were dating or women older than me in my family. Like, my family is so reserved. Nobody talks about their romantic relationships. Nobody talks about, you know, I think I had one aunt who would, you know, sometimes tell us, you know, this is how men behave and this is that. But to honestly, like, have honest conversations about how relationships work, that was not happening at all. All I was told was that I was not allowed to be in relationships. Mm-hmm. So I stumbled upon this lady named Rory Ray, who had a blog at the time about relationships. She would just have these blog posts every week about relationships. And she would always come back to the topic of the siren or the modern siren. She actually had a program at the time called the Modern Siren, just giving women tips on functioning like in your feminine energy. And she always stressed a lot about, you know, the feminine energy. And she did talk about, you know, like how important it is to switch hats, because feminine energy is receptive energy. It's more laid back than that like assertive masculine type energy. And of course, we need a balance of both in life. And that must have been my intro to Tantra, because that to me getting very deep into Tantra over the years. But that was my first introduction into how, you know, masculine and feminine energy works. And the concept of the siren is something that her program, The Modern Siren, got me really into the mythology behind sirens and its obvious ideas about feminine magnetism. But from my experience, and this was in 2010 when I first became aware of her. I actually, you know, have a group of online friends that I made on this blog, and we were like, we need to get to know each other. We formed a Facebook group. We've never met each other, but we would just talk about relationships on there, talk about feminine energy stuff, and that opened me up to, you know, doing more research and learning so much about feminine magnetism. And that's really where the whole siren thing came from.
I have an interesting last week. Also, my life has just gotten so synchronistic, so it's like funny. Everything you say, I'm like, I have something to risk. Last week, or 2 weeks ago or something, I was learning about the occult and just different symbolism that is used, like different symbols and stuff that is used, like to decipher like different archetypal energies. And so one of the things that for some reason came in front of my awareness was the logo of Starbucks. It's a siren, right? But also, and I was looking like deeper, something like drew me to like explore it deeper. And the siren is also a depiction of this Sumerian goddess Ishtar. And Ishtar is basically like the Sumerian version of Isis. So it's all like interconnected, and I'm like, it's just so cool to see all these threads. It's like it's been there, but we just haven't had eyes to see. It's like when it's like the goddess movement and the divine feminine kind of went underground, and it's been around us in symbolism and mythologies, but we didn't know what to look for. And now it's like people like us who, for some reason, like we've been tasked with being one of the first people, I think, to really like have open discussions about this and like be really like fully in embodiment and to empower other women. I actually like, this is synchronistic too, because I'm like, I just started working on a program. Like I've been doing like coaching, like one-on-one, but then I've always been drawn to like do like group containers. And it's funny because you were there when I had my first like coaching calls. Remember, I was so nervous like in our meetings. So now I'm like finally at that level of confidence where I'm like, I could host like group courses. And the first course that I ever want to host is like, I want to call it Goddess Initiation. And I want it to be a course to help women who feel like disconnected from their femininity to remember like that we all come to earth with this like goddess essence, and that we can turn it on whenever we want. And that when we do, like all the magnetism, like anything we want, it kind of begins to magnetize to us, and we just have to hold it. We just have to learn how to hold it, and we have to learn how to not succumb to those thoughts that we're less than and succumb to the victimhood, because you can't exist in both. So you have to like, the hardest part is just holding it, because there's all this conditioning that we have to like move through. But like it's so tied in, and I feel like it's so something that everyone's like collectively beginning to embrace.
Yeah, I think even a lot of what we learn in law of attraction ties into that, because, you know, we learn that we gain things or we achieve things through a level of assertion. From the time we're young, we're taught, you know, hard work brings success. We have to hustle. We have to do this. And there is value in that. Absolutely. There's value in taking action. But especially women, I believe, because of the way that feminine energy works and because our balance is heavier on the feminine side. And just generally, like I said, with attraction, there's a part of us that needs to learn that magnetism is not, and an assertion are not the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, there are ways to relax into something and allow it to happen rather than going after and making it happen all the time. And sometimes it's easier that way, and it's more satisfying that way. And that was something that I definitely had to learn when it comes to relationships too. You know, practicing just relaxing into it rather than trying to control outcomes and control things. And it's something that I have to constantly practice.
Yeah.
But the awareness, I think, is definitely a key part of the process. And I love that you mentioned that, you know, there are some of us that are tasked with having those conversations. And I believe that the more we have those conversations, the more it will, you know, give other people permission to recognize these things and to openly discuss it, you know, as wherever they feel comfortable. But that was definitely what your YouTube page has done for me. You know, because, you know, sometimes we have these experiences, like I told you, I had this long time period, and that was before I had my son, where I was very, very attuned to my reproductive cycle, but I didn't know anybody who was open to talking about that stuff in the ways that I wanted to. Because I mean, we have those conversations. Ooh, I'm on my period, so I can't do X, Y, Z. But we don't really have a lot of deep discussions about what that feels like, not just physically, but emotionally, psychically, all of that. And the internet has definitely helped you with, you know, being exposed to people who think differently. Because I'm on a small island where a lot of the people think the same way, and you even get bullied if you don't think that way too. But I've had the opportunity to connect with people like you, and, you know, our mutual connections, and other people like Lizzie Jeff, you know, like Rory Ray, and like the other sirens and the other goddesses and the other feminines out there who are actively doing the work and talking about it.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was remembering in our cacao circle, are you still in that? Are you still attending?
In a long time.
Me neither. But I remember, like, one of the earlier conversations or calls, I think it was this time last year, when Florencia was talking to Minari, or she was mentioning it or something, and he always said something that really stuck out to me back then, before I even had any understanding of like divine feminine embodiment has become a thing for me since, I would say, like November or October. But before that, like, I can think back to different like seeds that were planted, and something Minari said was that, like, when the pandemic started and everything, and Florencia was like giving voice to the indigenous elders to hear their perspective on the global situation, and they always said, like, this is a shift, like this is like a shift for humanity, and he always said that the women are the leaders of this shift. And that was like the first time I was like, I didn't know yet how it was gonna be the women that were the leaders of this shift. But there was still a resonance in that. I was like, yeah, that's so true, even though I didn't know how it was going to happen. And now it's like I'm starting to see, like, oh, it's because we have to bring it back to balance. Like, we've been living in this patriarchal, hyper masculine culture, and that's like really like created an imbalance in the way that we act. Like, everything, like you said, is all about assertiveness, and like, yeah, that gets you so far, but then also there's a level of what you can be so assertive that you're no longer in tune with like the greater plan. And it's like the debate of like nature versus man, and this whole thing about like people, this like technology based future. It's like when I think about some of the projects that I hear about, because I actually also I studied computer science in university, so I'm like very tuned into the conversations about artificial intelligence, and it almost like there's a part of me that feels like worried, because when you go so far into like transhumanism, where's like the space for spiritual growth, you know? Like it's like everything's externalized. It's like, oh, we need to fix something. Like in our course, like in A Course in Miracles, like the belief or the thing is like we have everything that we need within us, and that we can heal ourselves just as ourselves. Like we are healed because we are the healers. But then the other version of it, it's like the transhumanism stream is like, if something's wrong with us, we need something external. We need to like develop these technologies to fix us, and like we need to be fixed, and all the stuff is wrong. And it almost feels like divergent pathways that we're like kind of choosing between now. And that's what the Gigi Young, who I've been like consuming so much of her content, she really talks about that. It's like there's the ascension timeline and then the descension timeline. And the ascension timeline is like bringing us back into balance with the harmony of everything. And then the descension timeline is also a possibility, but that brings us even further away from our most natural ways of being and from our like deeper humanity.
Yeah. So much of that resonates. I'm not very techie, but I actually for over a year now have been writing for a client who's like they do IT law. So I've had to do a lot of research on it. I've been very, very up to date on all the news about, all the vaccine passports and all the new AI, and, because I have to stay up to date on that for work purposes. And I love, what you mentioned about, us focusing so much on what we're lacking and what we're missing. I feel like that has its place. But at the same time, just like you mentioned with the feminism movement, how long are we going to focus on the vibration of where we've been wronged and what we're lacking? And I feel like it's essential for us to recognize where the crack is. Like we have to recognize, okay, so there's something wrong here, but we never fix the problem from that place.
Yeah.
We have to somehow let go of the resistance and allow the solution to come in. And that has been a big part of me understanding what, the magnetism is. Because, you're not going after the answer. You're recognizing that an answer is necessary. There's a problem here and we need a solution. But a lot of the time the solution comes when you're relaxing about it,
Yeah. Because you almost need, like, in the work that, like, especially with how I make my YouTube videos and everything, I wait for the idea, like, going back to the beginning of this conversation, the idea for the period blood face mask, it didn't come from Ariji's ego structure. It came, like, my ego structure was very resistant to it. It came, like, the idea and the calling to do it was almost, like, it felt like instructions. Like, it was like, this is a task you need to do. And it's like when we're so focused on like our like ego-based desires and like what we think should happen, we don't have any space for that to come in. We don't have any space for those like more divine instructions to help us. Yeah.
Going with the flow.
Yeah.
Super important. I remember when we were supposed to do this last week, I mixed up the times and I was really disappointed. I was like, and it really felt like a synchronous time too, because we were messaging that morning and realizing that, okay, so we're both on our periods, like what, this is the time. And I'm like, you know what, Zan, just go with the flow. Like it didn't work out. We're gonna do it next week. It's still gonna happen. And then it's interesting to me because, like you said, you're always seeing all these synchronicities. When you joined, I was like, wow. And wearing the same color.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I noticed the exact, and I was gonna comment on it, but I just didn't.
I was like, wow, okay, so we're definitely in tune on a lot of things here. Like, it's always interesting to notice these things. There's just so much, but in all honesty, it's like that's Siren saying la vérité. In Selusho, we say la vérité, or in French they say la vérité, which is the truth. And we say that when somebody says something, you're like, yep, true.
Oh.
Yep.
Facts.
So yeah, facts. That's Siren saying facts. So yeah, there's just so much that can happen when you just allow it to, rather than chasing after things. My podcast started so randomly. I think it was last May, at the beginning of May, so it's almost a year. I should definitely commemorate somehow, but I had gotten off of cacao, and I was honestly in such that time, like when lockdowns were a little bit heavier, so everybody was just, at home. It was so easy to just go with the flow on everything, because there's no, especially with the way that I work, I have 2 deadlines a week, and I just kind of work around time. I schedule my time however I want to. So I was just going with the flow. I had been really into cinnamon at the time, and I would smudge with cinnamon. I would just light the cinnamon and smudge. And there was one day I got on Lizzie Jeff's live.
Yeah.
Like, are you smudging cinnamon? I'm typing out. She's like, yes, this is cinnamon. Like, what the hell? It's so funny how I'm sitting at home and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna smudge cinnamon. And I had just become aware of Lizzie Jeff, weeks prior. I get on her live a couple months later and she is smudging cinnamon.
Yeah. That's like one of the best feelings. And that's like, that happened to me, like it got, my experience in life got increasingly more synchronistic when I surrendered my control. And it's like when you do surrender the control, you realize, oh wait, actually there has always been this structure. Like everyone thinks like everything's chaotic, and like yes, there's aspects of chaos in the universe, but there's also this force that's holding everything together. Like we're not just like floating around random particles. Like what is that force that's holding all of us together? Like,
yeah,
and then
and calling us to certain things, because that is something so specific, like burning cinnamon.
Yes. So specific. And I don't think many people do it.
Yeah. But to get on there, and it's that same thing, that la vérité moment for me, like, wow, okay. There's definitely a common thread. I also love that you brought up Manari. Manari has been, when I first became aware of this man, I was just in awe. Because everything he speaks is just so profound to me. Yeah. And the fact that he's really into dreams. Because for me, a lot of my spiritual experiences have been centered around dreams and dreaming. And I noticed maybe about a decade ago that I was having like prophetic dreams, and not just dreams, but daydreams. And it was really freaking me out at the time, because I was like 20 years old and, away from home for the first time, living in the US. And it was so strange to me. I had a daydream one time waiting for the Greyhound, and in my mind, I saw a lady dressed in a very specific way get off the Greyhound. That's when the Greyhound was just pulling up, right? I'm seeing this in my mind. She's getting off the Greyhound, knocking over my suitcase where I have my laptop bag, and throwing my laptop to the ground, and it stops working. And then the bus pulls up, and the exact lady that I just saw in my mind
That's crazy.
And I'm in such awe that I don't move my bag. Like, I literally just stand there and watch her knock my bag over. And I got on the Greyhound after she got off to go back to Maryland. I was visiting family in Connecticut at the time. And I called my dad from the bus, and I'm telling him this story. And he's like, Zan, you didn't move the bag? I'm like, no, but what's important here is like true. Exactly what I saw, like that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
In my mind, it wasn't even getting insight into Zan, you should move your bag. It was insight into, hey, you have this power.
Yeah.
I got the message, and it was so interesting that when I got back to Maryland, I was so tired. I went to sleep. And in my sleep, I'm having this dream of me using a butter knife and screwing a certain part of my laptop and shifting and then screwing it back on. And then I woke up out of that dream, and I'm like, okay, let me do that. And the laptop started working.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because that has come, at the time I was so resistant to all the experiences that I was having, because there was also the involvement of people that I knew who had passed, and they would come to me in dreams. And at the time it was just so foreign and so scary to me. Eventually I did allow, and right now I keep like a dream journal where I would write down interesting dreams that I have, and I do oracle or tarot readings on it. And I was talking to my uncle recently. My brother was there, and I've done, tarot readings for my brother. My uncle was saying, tarot is fake. It's not real.
Yeah.
These people saying things. And I told him, well, actually, I read tarot, and you could ask, my brother was I said, you could ask him, I've done readings for him, ask him how it went and stuff. And he's like, no, these things are evil. You're going to need help to get rid of the demons that you're bringing on yourself.
Yeah.
And at that point, I obviously in a much stronger place than I was in a decade ago. So these things, don't really shake me. And I think to myself, I didn't call any of this upon myself. I did not ask to start having those dreams, but I allowed it to happen when I realized that it was happening. I allowed it to just, come through me, because I felt like there was definitely some value in what I was experiencing, for my own experience and maybe for other people. And I remember speaking to, I don't know if you remember Darius, who was, he was on Cacao one time.
I remember him, yeah.
Yeah, I had a consultation with him. And I was telling him about the dreams that I was having. And at that time, I was having a lot of very vivid dreams all day, all night. I was so tired that I was sleeping.
I remember that. I was so curious. I was like, I want to know about it. So I'm glad I'm knowing about it now.
So I spoke to him about it, after Cacao, we had a consultation. I spoke to him about it, and he told me that I'm actually, it's interesting because throughout the years I've dreamt, well, this started when I was 3 years old. My closest uncle, he passed in a car accident, and every night I would see him coming into my room and talking to me. But when I spoke to my parents about it, they told me it's a dream. He's dead. That's not him. And fast forward to like 2012 in New York, there was a psychic lady who brought it up without me asking. She's like, yeah, you had an uncle who passed when you were very young, and he's been visiting you. And it's funny because the reason I went to her was because the night before I felt his presence in my room. And it was unmistakable. I just knew that it was him. But I always have these dreams about people close to me, who passed, and they're always asking me to sing in the dream. In the beginning, I was so confused. I'm like, sing what? It wasn't until I dreamt about my great-grandfather on my mom's side, who I've met twice in my life because he lived in Holland for almost his entire life. I dreamt about him. I was standing at his grave and he asked me to sing. And I started humming, and the more I hummed, he would glow in gold until he just vanished. And that was the last dreamt about him. But when I told Darius about my dreams, he said, yes, you know, you're actually tasked with helping your ancestors to transition, and that is why you dream about them when they're asking you to sing, and it's very specific, you know, they're all asking you to sing. So he gave me some advice about setting up an altar, and he said that's definitely going to help you with how tired you're feeling, because the reason you're sleeping so much and dreaming so much is because there's a lot going on right now, like in, you know, on that realm. You know, we were in the middle of a pandemic with so many people dying. So there was a lot of transitioning going on. And he told me, once, you know, you set that up, that's really going to help. And I set it up the next day, and all of the exhaustion is gone. Like, he said what was happening was that I was channeling all that energy like through my own psychic and physical body, whereas I can set up an altar that would help them, so that the perfect is all on me, you know? And that was really profound, like experiencing that, because, you know, you hear it and you think, okay, yeah, but to see that I set the altar up, and literally the same day, it's like I went from having to take several naps a day and just always being tired to just feeling normal, like, you know, I could stay up and I could function. That was crazy.
Also interesting that you mentioned Darius, is that his name? He's the first person in that call that he came on the Cacao Circle. That was the first person that I think he was speaking about past lives in that call. And he opened me up to that, because I'd always heard about it, but hearing his experience like lit something in me. And after that, like a week after that, I had like my first like visualization where because at the time, like I was so into cacao. So I had this like very vivid visualization. I wasn't planning to have a past life kind of like centered meditation. I was just meditating. And I had all of a sudden, like, it felt like I could see it. I don't know if I could actually, like, with my eyes, but it was, like, a very clear scene, and it was, like, I was in this, like, little hut, and I was looking at my hands, and they were old, and I looked at, and, like, my hair was, like, long and gray, and I had little, like, dishes or, like, little pouches of different powders and different, like, herbs and stuff. And I recognized it, and then I like looked around, like in I was able to like look around in the room, and it was like this tiny little hut room, and there was like a little space for a bed, and then there was a little like, and I the information that came through was like that it was like it was like somewhere in South America, I don't know where it was, and that's why I have such a strong connection to cacao, because I worked so strongly as a medicine woman in that community with this, and like that experience, like it was activated within me because of Darius, and now it's like led me into so many other, like now I'm just open to it because I had that, because sometimes like you're interested in something, but it's like still so easy to be skeptical because you don't have the first-hand experience. But then when you do have the first-hand experience, you're like, wow. But then also it's hard to explain to other people. So I love that we're having this conversation, because the experience that you had, many people would be like, what the heck are you talking about? Sure, you set up an altar and like what about like, have you checked all the other variables that were in But me, I'm just like, that makes so much sense, because we do like our physical vessels, there's only so much energy, higher energy, like higher dimensional energy that it can handle, and we have to like build up capacity using focused intention. So it makes so much sense that when you set an altar to like direct some of that flow, it alleviated your physical symptoms.
The difference was remarkable, and within 24 hours. So for me, there was no doubt in my mind that had something to do with it. And I don't, discuss any of this with many people, because, I get that reaction, like what I get from my uncle, or some people are just like, okay. there are people who are like scared because they think that you can read their minds
Oh,
because
yeah.
and I assure you it's not any of that. It's just that I have these experiences, and it's not that I turn it on or off, but depending on my level of openness, my capacity will change. So there are
Yeah.
times in my life where I have so many dreams about so many things, and adding tarot to the mix, because I've only been reading tarot for a few months. I just got like tarot cards and oracle cards and started doing readings for myself and people close to me. But it's all like added confirmation, and I love divination, all types of divination, especially dream divination. But I've noticed that it's something that we all do, even in small ways. Sometimes, when we're young, we pick a flower and you're like, he loves me, he loves me not.
Yeah.
All of that is divination. One of my favorite, very simple ways to divine was with books. I love books and I keep diaries. I even do them with my diaries now. But I used to pick up a random book from a shelf and just turn it to a random page and put my finger down on a paragraph and read it. And it would just speak to exactly what I'm feeling or exactly what I'm wondering at the time. And I feel like everybody can tap into that because my dad has given me stories. So throughout my teens, my dad lived in Barbados while we lived in St. Lucia because he was working over there for about 10 years. And when he first went over there, he was kind of stressed out about it because, he had so many kids that he had to leave in St. Lucia and go over there on his own and start, a whole new life working there. And he said when one of his first days out in Bridgetown after landing, I can't remember the name of the company because it was different, but he said a man just randomly spoke to him and said something to him using the name of the company that he came over there to work for. And he said around that same time, he also went into a bookstore and he picked up a book and was flipping through it. And he read a story about a man in the book who was in the exact same situation he was in, had a son about to go to university, had a whole kids he had to leave and move to another place to work. And I'm like, there is a lot more to this stuff than we give life credit for. Like we're constantly in communication with life, and to me that is what divination is about. We see numbers, we see patterns, we see things popping up and just grabbing our attention all the time, and all of it is relevant. It's all messages that we're receiving.
Yeah. And then once we do allow ourselves to follow the breadcrumbs that are all around us, it like leads us into this version of life that we like didn't even know was possible for us. And it's like exactly what we've been looking for, but it's so hard for some of us to like really take those messages seriously. Because it's like, it's just a coincidence. But I'm like, now I believe that there is no such thing as coincidences. And everything that happens in my external reality, I'm like, this is meaningful now. Like every conversation, like every random occurrence, I'm like always thinking, like I always take note of what happened, because I know that sometime in the future I'm going to be able to realize where the connection was and how all of it's been like I can just connect all the dots all the way through. And it's so cool to live life like that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's just being open to experiencing the magic of that. Excuse me. Just being open to things. And I've been keeping a lot of journals for the past several years for that exact reason, to go back into it and look at different patterns that I've been dealing with. And it's so interesting when I take one of my own diaries and open it to a random page, and I have advice for my current self.
Yeah.
me 5 years ago that I needed to hear in this moment. And that just always has me in awe.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel, so this is interesting, that we're talking about this in particular, because like I told you, I'm so into tarot and I watch a lot of tarot readers on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one that I've just recently become aware of. I can't even remember her name because I haven't watched many of her videos, but she posted one for my sign this week. And the title was Defending Your Beliefs. Now, I didn't listen to it because I'm like, where am I going to be defending my beliefs? But I think it's not so much defending, but sort of honoring and explaining and, giving into the resonance that exists. Because
Mm-hmm.
there are things that I will experience, like I said, I do not discuss with many people. But with somebody like you, it's easy for me to just open up and share that, And, I started the podcast to share, but obviously, you don't always want to just hear your voice talking and great to always have those other perspectives, because we come from completely different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Completely different backgrounds, but the parallels are impossible to ignore.
Yeah. It's like the themes are like similar though. And even as you say defending your beliefs, like that has been the theme for the past couple of days for me. Like it's just really been highlighted in the past week or so, like how much I still carry shame. I actually made a video, like I posted it yesterday. It's like I titled it, "You're not looking for external validation, you're looking for validation from self." And it's because I realized that I was like, it's like back to A Course in Miracles. It was like that one principle, which was something about if you it's not, I don't know what the exact wording was, but it was like if you defend you admit that you're being attacked or something like that, you know what I mean? But it goes back to that. And yesterday I had a lot of people over at my house, and again, like since quarantine started, it's been really easy for me to like take space and be in complete flow and like not worry about what other people think about me. But having people in my life that were like, I don't know, one of the people was asking me about like my coaching thing, and he was like telling me how I should do it. And I was speaking about it in terms of magnetism. I was like, I don't go look for people to like coach. Like, I don't go look for people who are like I don't do cold market. Like, all of that is like not my vibe at all. Like, I'm not gonna message someone being like, hey, like I've been through similar experiences. Do you want to hire me? Like, I hate that. And so he was talking to me about that, and that came up. I was like, I realized like I don't have to defend myself. I can just state how I do it. And if he wants to argue with it, I don't actually have to defend anything. I don't have to engage in the argument, whereas a past version of myself would be like, I need him to know I need him to understand me. But I'm like, how can he understand when he hasn't gone through everything that I've been through over the past year, with all the synchronistic events and all the conversations and the information that has come my way? Like, there's no so yeah, so similar.
It's so true. I think part of what makes us a little bit nervous or resistant to share is because if someone has not experienced that, we begin to think that is this not real? Because we're so used to collectivism, collective experiences, and we all agree upon the same thing. Grass grows and trees green, and this is our reality. The wall is solid. Even if we read and we know for a fact through science that this chair that I'm sitting on is 99% empty space, we all agree that it's something that we can literally sit on, and we can tap on the table. All of this stuff is solid. And we all agree upon that. And it's like when you have experiences that are a little bit outside of our collective agreements as human beings, we get very nervous about it because we have this underlying belief that we're all supposed to agree upon the same things. And interestingly enough, I was having a conversation with a friend earlier today, and just talking about, you know, how I function as a friend in general. She's very similar to me, so she understands it. Like, I'm not a friend that would talk to you every day, you know? I will connect with you when we sync up, and then I require a lot of alone time and just time away from people to process on my own. And I get very agitated when I constantly have to come out of that and deal with people. And she said to me, yeah, and I think like more people should be that way. And I was like, actually, no, I feel like, you know, people who aren't really that way, they will resonate with people who are just like them, and they can talk to each other on the phone every single day. And that has nothing to do with me. Like, that's completely fine. But me personally, I will let people know, if you're dealing with me, this is how I operate. I require time alone, and I will not be available to you every single day. I mean, I have to be available to my son on such a consistent basis that I really do not even have the energy to add any, you know, to that mix. I need me time.
Yeah.
And it's completely fine if people don't need that time. They're just gonna link up with the friends who want to hang out every day. So for me, when I'm sharing my beliefs with somebody who is probably not really open or hasn't really experienced a lot of that, I have to keep my ego in check and be like, it's okay if they haven't experienced that, and it's completely fine if they believe X, Y, and Z. I'm just sharing my experience. So even if they tell me, what, that's insane, like, what, dead people in your dreams, like, I'm like, that's fine. That's my role. Everybody is not meant to do the same thing or to experience life in the same way, and we're all tasked with our own, you know, differentiated characteristics that fit the role that we're meant to be here for, you know?
Yeah. That's so on point.
So that takes away a lot of my nervousness with sharing these things, because I can feel like even if somebody has never experienced that and they don't even believe it, that's completely fine.
Yeah, I think a lot of my wounding, like my whole life has been kind of like about that theme, about me being like the one who has a differentiated reality structure from the rest of the group. And then when I grew up and I like left Islam as a reality structure and I got exiled from my family, there was like wounding there. But like when I think back at it now, it's like that was the initiation. It was like a practice round for like the truth that we preach now. Like the reason I'm able to film a video with me putting period blood on my face, which is so out of the norm, and like most people who are not in the similar communities as us, they'd be like turned off by it or like judge it or something. The reason I can do it is because I've been through an initiation in my life where I literally like went through and processed and came out fine after losing my biological family. Like it's like it can't get to be exiled from that group that you grew up with. It's like I don't think it can get worse than that. And that comes back to like trauma. It's like the tasks, like what we have been tasked with, like what our role is in each lifetime. Like the trauma adds to it because it's like an initiation. It's to help us be more fully in the role. It's to help us like transcend the fear of being in the role.
Yeah, help us expand. Like, I mean, I have a lot of similar experiences to you. I wasn't exiled from my family, but I feel like I forcefully exiled myself just because rather than let me go into whatever it is I was drawn to, my family insisted on holding me very close, but dictating to me that I behave in a certain way. I have closed down my social media and started completely over because my parents' friends would screenshot my on Instagram and send it to them, and I'm just like, I'm just being me. I'm just doing what I think. I'm not asking y'all to do it too. Eventually, you know, when I moved out and got my own place, I just really started limiting my contact with my family because I realized that there was a part of me who was suppressing my own urges and my own intuition just because I did not want to displease anybody.
Yes.
And in some ways, I feel like the exiling would have probably been easier for me because it's like, oh, I don't have to think about y'all, you know? But
Yeah.
it's the keeping me close and all of that, but at the same time wanting to dictate to me how I should behave if I want to be kept close. And I'm like, maybe I don't want to be kept close.
Yeah.
Maybe I just want y'all to leave me alone and, you know, go about my merry way. But in everything, like there's some sort of balance that could be struck, but it has to come from both sides. Like I have to be willing to express myself, you know, however I am. And if somebody wants to be, you know, an integral part of my life, they have to be accepting of that.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, how I operate now.
Yeah. The best way to be. And I think that ties into, like, I'm very similar to you. Like, I need a lot of alone time. Because when I spend too much time with other people, it, like, almost blocks my truth. Because I'm so, like, open and, like, empathetic and all that. So it's like, yeah, you have to be not conflicting in your energy to me for me to be around you all the time.
Yep. And it's so easy sometimes for us to pick up on other people's energy and not just pick up on it. And, you know, if we don't get the time to sit down and process what is ours and what is theirs, we just begin to live through their paradigms and begin to see ourselves through their eyes and behave in that way. And, you know, it's important for me to define myself and take time away from everybody to realize what part of this is me and has not been forced on me or suggested, you know, that I went along with, or, you know, whatever it might be. Yeah. But yeah, that alone time is
yeah. Yeah.
Key. It's key. It's so interesting, you know, how you said that it was an initiation, because it's all, you know, part of that expansion as well. Like you go through that dark night of the soul when you realize that the people that you've grown up depending on and looking to for validation all this time are rejecting you. And I think it makes you so much bolder as a person. I always tell people now that, you know, there's really nothing that anybody could say about me that would hurt my feelings. I've heard it all from my like, if you know, the person who made me, it can't hurt my feelings at this point, I don't think you can, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like I needed that. I'm actually grateful to her for it in some ways, because it's like, you know, people might look at it as a bad thing, but it's made me so much stronger to the point where anybody can question me now and I'm not bothered, you know?
Yeah. It's like a blessing in disguise. Like, as hard as it was to go through, it's like I can literally be and do whatever I want. I don't have to worry about anyone, because, like, if I don't care about what my immediate family thinks, I don't give a shit what you random person on the street thinks. Like, I'm just gonna keep doing it.
We live in a time where random people on the internet are coming at you like you have a personal problem with you. Like, listen.
I know. Oh my God.
Personal problem. And for me now, it's so easy for me to just mute and move on with my life. Like, not let it affect me, because at the end of the day, I don't live for any of those people. And the satisfaction that I seek is not the satisfaction of other people agreeing with me.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need that. I don't need that validation. Like you said, I need the validation from self. How do I feel about what I'm doing?
Yeah.
If I feel good about it and I'm not hurting anybody, then fine.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we talk about with roles. Like, we need to be able, in what we're doing, like, what the conversations that we're having, like we're here to expand people, and we can't have that expansion process without triggering people in certain ways. Like you have to trigger them to like hit something to like cause that reaction. Anyway, one of the things that when you said, like, this random girl, she commented on my period blood video and she was like, this is disgusting or something, and then YouTube, like, sometimes it just filters out comments, so she was like, well, you deleted my comment, just goes to show how much you can handle, right? And then I'm like, who are you? And like, anyway, I said something like, I didn't delete your comment, sis. And she goes, I am not your sis, first of all. I'm like, okay, girl.
Wow.
It was just such an emotional reaction that I provoked. And I always see that as like, I'm like, yes, that's like exactly what I was here to do. Because once you have that strong emotional reaction, like, whether it was positive or negative, it's living in her mind as a significant experience.
Yeah.
And it's going to inform.
She will process it, and it will, be to her benefit when she, processes why it's tricky, like in that way. But it's so funny that, I go through your comments a lot because I love how you handle them. Like, you have some people coming at you in such a strong way over like you changing your religious beliefs and
Oh,
and
yeah.
I am like, oh, like Arij is you have to be a strong person. I'm looking at like every time I watch a video, I'm looking at the comments and I'm like, who are these people? Like, why are they so invested? But they didn't stumble upon your page by accident.
Yeah.
And nothing is random. There's there are videos that I probably felt that way about at some point. And even, in my personal relations, if we're being honest, in personal relations, I remember one time talking to my son's dad about arguments that we were having and telling him that, I don't even feel bad when we argue. And I'll explain why. It's because there's so much clarification that comes from it, even if it might be, so much anger in the beginning, at some point we settle into, okay, this is not okay with you. That is not, you're always in a better place after you've addressed it than you were before. You get that clarification. So, it's, I don't really see it as a bad thing to go through that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like bringing light to the shadows. Like to heal the shadows, you have to like illuminate them. And it's like sucks. It's like can be hard to deal with, like to face them. But it's only once you face them that you can actually deal with them. Yeah,
it's like the horror of opening up, like there's a room in your house that you've never opened the door to. And then when you open the door, it's like bats and dust and a whole bunch of junk. And you're like, what the?
Yeah.
But if you don't open the door and like face what's behind it, you're never going to know what's in that room. You're never going to make use of that room. You're expanding your whole like being just by opening that door and facing whatever is in there.
Yeah. Very true. I love that. I feel like I'm like getting really hungry. I'm like, we could go on for honestly all day. I feel like we wouldn't run out of things to talk about. My mind is already like, oh, and I could like talk about one thing that I just want to say real quick. Just coming up for some reason is I was thinking this morning about like, because I get such a positive reaction to my videos from people, and I always wonder like, sometimes because I've been in like the YouTube and content creation thing, I always sometimes wonder about what the energetics behind doing that is, behind like us posting ourselves and then having people that we don't even see like interact with our energy. Like, what does that actually feel like on an energetic level? And when you said about like, I've become so desensitized to these randoms that are like coming at me with so much like force. But I just had this thought just now that like maybe one of the like because I always want like we always want like our view count to go up and we want our subscriber count to go up. But what I just thought about was maybe one of the reasons why I've been kind of like cocooned into a smaller view count is because imagine if like even in the smaller subscriber level I'm getting this much, like imagine what it would like become when it gets bigger. And I have to be strong enough to handle that, and I have to be strong enough in a sense of validating myself to be able to like continue on my path, to continue like fulfilling that role that I'm here to fulfill, even with all these. Anyway, that was just something that came up because my ego's always like, I want more subscribers because the numbers game, and I just realized like, oh, it might just be because there has to be a certain level of self-confidence in place to have that audience and to be able to continue on my path despite having all this like discordant energies coming through and attack energies.
feeling self-assured enough, whatever you're doing right now. It's interesting because, you know, with my podcast, because I explore all of these topics that I do not discuss with people in my personal life, I seldom share anything that's on my personal social media pages or, but the last, you know, interaction that I did like this with my son's godmother, she posts on her YouTube as well. So I just shared the link to her YouTube on my WhatsApp page. And my sister responded, she's like, oh, I loved it. I shared it with the entire family. I was like, what? Why would you do that? I do not want these people to find my podcast.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, you know, you have this, like you have this idea or this thing that you're working on, and you're, you know, trying to keep it safe from certain viewpoints, especially in the initial stages. And my podcast is less than a year old. So I, you know, I'm not at the point where I'm sharing it with anybody that I know personally. I get viewers from, you know, I have a page specifically for it and so on. But it's so interesting, you know, we feel like really protective of these things in the early stages until we feel like, you know what, I am sure enough, like in this and in myself, to share it with whoever. So when she did that, that kind of just opened it up for me, because I'm like, okay, well, they already know, you know, out of the bag.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because nobody's said anything to me. I feel like they're aware that I'm at that point where it's not that their opinions are irrelevant, but it's not going to affect what I do. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's so important for us to be able to do that. And yeah, I feel like everyone who starts making content and sharing themselves and sharing their truth goes to that phase. Like I'd like a point where for a couple months I was like, I really have to keep this channel secret, and then it just like gets found and you're like, what do I do? But then it really helps you be more fully in this, like as a podcast host, more fully in the role, more committed and more invested, and it just produces better work.
Yeah. And more authentic, which is very important, because I mean the podcast is called the Siren Experience.
Yeah.
Me just speaking about things that I'm interested in and my experiences, but specific to those topics that I don't really, you know, discuss with those people. And it's when you have someone in the crowd that you know personally, you're like, like you know me, you saw me grow up, and you're gonna be like, this person, but I know who this person is, and I can authentically step forward as that person, you know, despite who is watching or who isn't. Yeah.
Wow. I love how the conversation that we had today just like fully touched on like mostly everything that I've been exploring. I love that. This is such a, and this is like provoked me. You're the first person that I've done, because I have a podcast with Garrett, my boyfriend, but I've never I've been too scared to open myself up to other people. And this was such a fun experience. And I didn't expect us to go for so long.
Yeah, me either. My son actually arrived like in the last half hour. I don't know if you heard him, but I had his dad take him on a walk so I could get like some quiet. And I've had one other person, you know, on my podcast. I do the monthly thing with his godmother, which we started because we had a podcast before where we were doing that for a while. And I said, you know what, let's bring it back. We'll just feature it on my podcast once a month. And I've been nervous to reach out to people because I'm like, who do I ask? What do we talk about? But from watching your content, I'm like, me and Arij would have enough to talk about. I just want to hear a bit more about this mask thing. Let me just reach out to her, you know, and I'm really happy that I did.
I'm so happy that you did too.
Yeah, really grateful for this experience.
And it was really expansive for me because when you first messaged me, I was like, will I be able to like talk? Like, what if I don't know what to say? Like all these thoughts came up that were like, but doing it like helped me transcend all of that. I'm like, oh, I don't actually have to, because when you do your own videos, there's almost like a level of like control that you have. Because you're like, oh, like if I don't like something, I'll just cut it out. But when you have a conversation with another person, like it's not in integrity to cut like important sections off because you felt uncomfortable with how you looked, or like it's just like transcending that and just being like, no, I can do this. Like I can actually show up and have meaningful conversation. And we had the best conversation ever. And I want to do more with you at some point, and I see us like now I'm just having visions of us like just continuously doing this, and both of our platforms growing larger, and us being like, oh my god, remember when we were small and we did that one podcast?
Oh yeah. But I love the flow of our conversation. I love the alchemy of the way our energy interacts with each other.
So nice.
Yeah, definitely, you know, a very comfortable flow with you. So that was nice. That was really nice to experience.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what you mean, because, you know, recording a podcast, just me, it's the other thing is that I'm the only person talking. So I feel like, okay, I need to have enough information on this for me to really carry it. Like,
yeah.
But having someone else, it's like things that I didn't even think of adding, or I didn't think of explaining it in that particular way. You were able to, you know, carry the conversation in that way. And that's very, very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and just different perspectives of the same topic. It's so... Because some people are, like, more in resonance with how you communicate, and some people are more in resonance with how I communicate. So to be able to, like, capture both of those people and intrigue them enough is, like, so powerful and valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yay, I'm so excited. I'm so happy. I'm so excited to watch this back, too.
Me too. Yeah, I'm very definitely excited. I think we've been probably on there for like 2 hours.
Yeah. It's funny because yesterday I was thinking, this is the last thing I'll say and then I'll let you go, but I was thinking about the Joe Rogan podcast, and because I was watching him, and I was watching I was like, oh my god, how does this man do like a 3-hour conversation? I wonder if I'll ever get to that level. And then here I am the next day, like easily having like a 2-hour conversation, like nonstop. It's just flowing. It's so nice.
And it could have gone longer.
Yeah, could have.
I think that's a lot to, you know, just like I said, the alchemy, it's a very comfortable one.
Yeah.
I 100% enjoyed your energy on here.
Thank you. I enjoyed your energy as well. Thank you for having me on. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, and thanks for rescheduling and like us both of us like showing up to the reschedule, because it wasn't, I was like, oh man, like because I was like so prepared, and then I was like, it fell through, and I was like, oh my god, I really hope that it happens next week, because this was something that I really did want to talk about with other people.
Yeah. I'm honestly, when I first saw the video, I was very excited, because it's something that I want to talk about. You know, I spoke about the free bleeding, like I said on the podcast, but finding somebody that I can, who is comfortable having those conversations. And I felt like with you, I mean, for you, you said that the free bleeding is a bigger step, but I looked at you, you know, you doing that, like, wow, okay. And it's so cool because, you know, even with the free bleeding, Lizzie Jeff's book speaks about it as well.
I have it. I have her book.
And there's so much else that she's spoken about that I'm sure that you probably are aware of a lot of it and practicing some of it, and I am too, that we didn't even get to. So maybe on the next one.
Yeah, I'm sure there's gonna be so many other conversations.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. I love you so much.
Love you, hun.
Bye. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye, you too.